Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to trace the journey of this one really powerful idea. How this online bogeyman called Antifa, something that was kind of cooked up in fringe forums, managed to travel all the way across the globe from Washington to Wellington, and then ended up in a presidential declaration with some very, very real consequences. Okay, so the research we're digging into today really kicks off with a pretty wild event set for September 18th, 2025. This post right here on Truth Social. Now, the study presents this as a hypothetical, but it argues that it's basically the logical conclusion. The place's whole narrative has been heading for years, starting out in these fringe online communities. So, to really get how we got to that point, we're going to follow the roadmap laid out in this detailed research report. First, we'll look at the declaration itself. Then, we'll break down how this Antifa bogeyman was even built. We'll see it in action during a protest in New Zealand, unpack the playbook they used, and finally, connect the dots on the global feedback loop that it created. All right, first up, let's look at the event that really brought all of this to a boil. President Trump's announcement, and the immediate questions that popped up about whether it was even legal or based in fact. Okay, so first things first, what or who is Antifa? Well, the study defines it pretty simply. It's short for anti-fascist. We're talking about a loose network of activists, not some formal, card-carrying organization. And that decentralized part is absolutely crucial, because that's the very reason legal experts are kind of scratching their heads, questioning if you can even label a movement like this a terrorist group in the first place. And this is where it gets really interesting. You've got this contrast, right? On one side, you have all these legal experts saying, hey, there's no legal authority for this. But on the other side, this official declaration from the president gives a huge stamp of approval to a totally different picture of Antifa, a picture that, as we'll see, was carefully painted for years in some very specific corners of the internet. So, if the whole legal and factual basis is so shaky, where did this powerful, scary image of Antifa actually come from? Well, the study takes us right to the source. It dives into over 4,800 posts from these fringe Telegram channels in New Zealand to show us exactly how this boogeyman was constructed, piece by piece. And what the researchers found, well, it wasn't just random chatter. It was a consistent pattern. The conversation always, and I mean always, portrayed Antifa through 5 specific and deeply negative lenses. Think of them as frames. And these frames all worked together to build this image of a single evil enemy. So this slide really breaks it down for us. First, they're framed as violent terrorists, causing chaos and burning cities. But get this, they're also framed as secret false flag operators, blamed for violence to make their opponents look bad. They're not a real movement, see, they're just puppets of a deep state bankrolled by people like George Soros. And on top of all that, they're the ultimate ideological enemy. Somehow, they're both communists and the real fascists at the very same time. And finally, they're just flat out dehumanized. So this is the theory. But how does it look when it hits the real world? The report gives us a perfect example from 2022 down in Wellington, New Zealand. Right. So this is where the rubber really meets the road. The study shows how this whole framework, which was mostly built around stuff happening in the US, was just picked up and dropped directly onto a major protest on the complete other side of the planet. And I mean, look at this. The report points out a really striking parallel. The exact same story, the same narrative template that was used to explain away the violence at the January 6th Capitol riot, it was lifted, almost word for word, and just slapped onto the fires and clashes that happened at the end of the Wellington protest a year later. It wasn't a new story at all. It was just a recycled script for a new location. This timeline from the study just lays it all out so clearly. You can see the evolution. In 2021, the whole conversation is laser-focused on America. A year later, in 2022, it's localized for New Zealand. By 2023, the net gets wider, and it merges with other issues, targeting the trans community. And by 2025, it's done. It's fully institutionalized. It's become this ready-made bogeyman you can use for any and all opposition. Okay, so when you see this narrative evolve so consistently, you have to ask, right? How does it work so well? Well, it's not by accident. The study shows there's a playbook, and the researchers identified a very systematic approach that uses what's known as dangerous speech. And look, this isn't about just disagreeing with someone's politics. The entire goal of these techniques is to frame your opponents as this inhuman, evil threat. That's what primes an audience for hostility. And honestly, nothing makes that clearer than the specific gut-level language that gets used again and again and again. The report documents this clear pattern of dehumanizing language. They're called cockroaches, they're called vermin, and scum. And you have to understand, this isn't just schoolyard name-calling. This is language specifically designed to strip away someone's humanity, to paint people as a kind of pest that needs to be wiped out. It makes aggression against them seem not just okay, but maybe even necessary. And as you can see from this table, the Antifa label is, well, it's incredibly useful as a catch-all. It acts like an anger to attack this huge range of things, from ideas like wokeism, to institutions like the media, to specific people like George Soros, and even entire communities like Black Lives Matter and the LGBTQ+ community. Okay, so let's bring this all home and see how it all connects back to where we started, creating this powerful feedback loop that runs from these fringe Telegram channels all the way up to the president. Because what the study concludes is that the president's post, it wasn't new. It wasn't introducing some radical new idea. It was an almost perfect mirror. It captured the language, the themes, the conspiracies, everything we just saw bubbling up in these Telegram channels. It reflected the narrative. And by doing that, it gave it the ultimate validation. So why does any of this matter for a country like New Zealand, thousands of miles away? Well, according to the report, a U.S. presidential declaration has direct, real-world effects. It validates local conspiracy theories, it hands people a portable terrorist label they can slap onto their political opponents at home, it reinforces all that dehumanizing language, and it encourages people to connect the dots and see a global conspiracy playing out right in their own neighborhoods. And that really leaves us with a final and pretty crucial question about our own shared reality. What happens when that line between online chatter and political fact just dissolves? When these fringe narratives get a stamp of approval from the highest level of power? It's a powerful dynamic for sure, and definitely something to think about long after this explainer is over.